Thrilled to welcome a third one of our Ideas Challenge winners to wrap up this section of the program, Oregon Representative Janelle Bynum, also a candidate for Congress, who, among her many achievements in the legislature, is showing how we make the most of new federal investments during the Biden administration. So we congratulate her for her legislation on leveraging federal CHIPS funding and creating a diverse STEM workforce, a winner of our Ideas Challenge. And Representative Bynum, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. So how many of you have an HBCU in your state? Okay, so you know what it is. Does anybody not know what an HBCU is? Okay, that's fair. I'm going to use an acronym here. HBCU is a historically black college or university. So I'll just get started and we'll lay that groundwork. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. And it's an honor to be able to deliver like my little slice of America. It's exciting because I'm a mom of 4. I'm a small business owner, and I've been a state legislator for the past 7 years. And I think it's an exciting time. Like, people feel a little, I don't know, feel like they're in the doldrums a little bit. But it's an exciting time for people like me to do the work of attracting federal funds, getting huge opportunities to shift the narrative in our country, and it's a huge opportunity to drive economic prosperity like never before for our communities. So I think we're really at a moment where we can redefine what our future looks like and really drive the competitive spirit. Now, I will say competitive spirit because I am a sports mom. I am an Oregon Duck sports mom. I am the mom of number 23, Ellis Bynum, and I am competitive. I'm not an athlete, but I am competitive. And so this, working with the CHIPS Act, I think was really an opportunity for us to do something very, very different in Oregon. I will say that as I'm an electrical engineer, and in 2001, we had September 11th, and that changed the landscape for our family. I left GM up in Michigan, and we decided to move to Oregon, which was my husband's family home. And I remember having this conversation with my mom. She's like, "You gonna leave your engineering career to go to Oregon?" I was like, "Yes, Mom. I'm gonna, we're gonna forge this new path. Everything's gonna be okay." But when I got to Oregon, my plan to work in the semiconductor industry was like nixed. It was called the Silicon Forest, but the Silicon Forest had burned up, and all of the jobs were going back to Asia. So I was left, I had an MBA, I had an electrical engineering degree. I was a kid that was bringing everything to the table, but there was no job for me. And that, to me, was the real tragedy. So in looking at the CHIPS opportunity, I said, that is not going to happen to the next generation of our kids. If they're going away, if they're graduating from high school and choose to go away, they're not going to come back home to Oregon with nothing to look forward to. That was the big idea for me. So Oregon, I would say, was naturally positioned for investments from the CHIPS Act. Because we have Intel, we have analog devices, we're pretty big, we carry our own. And so what we did was we put in $200-300 million into investments for, matching funds for companies. But what we also did was 2 grants to 2 smaller organizations that would help our students go to HBCUs and come back home with STEM degrees. And this was particularly important because we know that children of underrepresented communities always get the short end of the stick. It's just consistent. So I felt like we needed to be intentional. Not necessarily intentional with set-asides, but intentional about opportunity. And the way I can bring this to life for you is this. So my mother grew up in South Carolina, class of 1970. This is the first time I'm in a room where most of the people aren't in that class. Class of 1970, and she was a valedictorian. She went to a segregated high school. That's not that long ago, y'all. She was a valedictorian, but there was no plan for her to go to college. There was no plan for her to do anything. There was nothing waiting for her in Horry County, South Carolina. And I thought, this is where I think being a lawmaker is really important. How do you bridge talent with opportunity? Whether it's an underrepresented minority, whether it's a kid, from rural America, or it's a kid that's just in poverty. There is so much talent in this country that is underutilized. How do we bridge talent with opportunity? So I will say that when we were debating, we had a whole semiconductor committee set up. I think the legislators will appreciate that when you're designing legislation, you actually need to design the infrastructure to pass the legislation. So we did a joint committee. And as we were discussing, how we were going to do incentives and how much we were going to do, I brought up the fact that I wanted to make sure that HBCUs were a part of our legislation. And some of my colleagues who were not as familiar were like, well, we don't want to do this, and we don't want to set aside this. And I said, well, let me just explain something to you. We have Oregon students at HBCUs, and we have Oregon students who want to attend HBCUs. But if you look at a map, Oregon is a long way from Texas, Alabama, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Georgia, where most of them are concentrated. And what I have found, because I have the 2 college-age kids, I found that kids want to go, but they don't know how to get there, and they don't know how to stay there. So it's not just enough to send kids to school. We have to graduate them. So we put in about $3 million to 2 cohorts called Building Blocks to Success and Self-Enhancement, Inc., and we've already seen the benefits. They've already started taking tours. They haven't even gotten the money yet, but they're preparing to get this money and continuing the work that they're doing to build STEM students. We also attended a tour with them going to analog devices, and these kids were sharp. Now, the only thing that was really tough about the visit to analog devices, because we were going around the clean rooms, and they really wanted to put on the bunny suits. We had to delay that. But we walked past the building trades, and I was like, hey, how y'all doing? And they were like, yeah, make sure you tell these kids we're putting rubber cement on a pipe for $130K a year. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So, even then, there's still opportunities in STEM, even without a college degree, and I think that that was so important. Just to close, I will say that the onus is really on us as leaders to provide economic empowerment for the next generation, and it's going to require us to think outside of the box. It's going to require us to disrupt some of the normal things that we have in our state legislatures. I put this at the bottom of my speech, but I'm just going to say, if you have an HBCU in your state, you should be funding them for infrastructure, whether that's their dorms, whether that's their Wi-Fi and connectivity, whether it's scholarships, or whether it's partnerships, for instance, with places like the University of Oregon or Oregon State University, so that kids can get their master's degrees, or they can get higher education, or they can spend a semester abroad. We need these connected people. We need these people who are used to working in diverse environments in order to power our nation's economy, in order to protect our national security, and in order to provide something for kids to look forward to. You just heard the last presentation. If our kids don't have anything to look forward to, I don't know why we're working. I personally want my kids to live down the street from me. They're not going to do it. But, Thanksgiving is going to be so lit when they can all come home. That, to me, is the essence of the work that we're doing. That is what really powers my advocacy for STEM. I will say, just from an economic standpoint, I pulled a piece of data from the UNCF, and it reads this. These students, meaning STEM students, have an advantage long past graduation. A whopping 25% of African American graduates with STEM degrees come from HBCUs. Eight HBCUs were among the top 20 institutions to award the most science and engineering bachelor degrees to Black graduates from 2008 to 2012. An HBCU graduate can expect to earn an additional $927,000 in their lifetime, which is 56% more than they could expect to earn without their HBCU degrees or certificates. From start to finish, an HBCU education is a setup for success. We're not determining outcomes, but we are being very intentional about our outcomes. And that is the message that I wanted to bring to you today. You can do more in your cities to drive outcomes for our students. You can do more in your states. And that is what we did in Oregon. Thank you.